Hi, I'm Ann McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And this is the Ann Phelim Scoop. And it's a bit unusual today. Unlike normally, we would have Magda here. We would have a lot of cameras, a lot of help. But we've reduced everything down. We didn't want to bring Magda here and create any danger for anyone. So we're just operating from the iPhone.
And this very expensive microphone. So everything should be good. And you can also watch us on YouTube as well at the Ann Phelim Scoop YouTube channel. So let's have a rundown of what we're going to have on this week's program.
So we're going to have a very special segment. We're going to have Robert Bryce, an interview with Robert Bryce, talking about his new book, A Question of Power,
which you can now see if you're on the YouTube channel,
which is all about electricity, and it's absolutely fascinating. And particularly given what's going on, we got a chance to ask him as well about the situation with the grid and if the grid is at all vulnerable at the moment. We're also going to have, because this is a very strange time. We're all just trying to catch up with the news every day, something new. So we've got a reflection that I want to read from a monk in Ireland that I think is really gorgeous. So as we said at the beginning, one of the things that we wanted to do was, just share, I think this is a great time for people to share things that they've come across, things that everyone else is sharing with everyone. I mean, one of the great things about the internet is at times like this that it gets us, keeps us connected. But anyway, this was written by, I just wanted to read this. It's by, and I'm going to put this up on Facebook, and we're going to put it up everywhere, basically. It's a reflection by Brother Richard of the Capuchin Franciscans called Lockdown. Yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they say that in Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and grey and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open, so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. Today, a young woman I know is busy spreading flyers with her number throughout the neighbourhood so that the elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, the sick, the weary. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbours in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and we remember, yet yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. Yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there is even death, but there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen behind the factory noises of your panic. The birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming, and we are all encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul. And though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing. I think that's rather beautiful. And we started talking earlier, you and I, Phelim, about things people could maybe do right now in this very, very specific circumstance that none of us are prepared for and that none of us can remember the likes of. I spoke to a friend of mine in Ireland who's in her 80s, and I asked her if there was anything she could compare it to, and she said the only thing was when she was very little and her parents, and it was the World War II, and her parents were frightened, and that was the nearest thing she could think of. So we talked about some suggestions that people could have, and one I really like, given the fact that I'm kind of a little upset here by having read that, but one idea that I think is fun, and a friend of mine suggested to me, was that we could Skype each other and have like a virtual cocktail party and have like a glass of wine, and arrange to meet your friend on Skype and have like a glass of wine and just the regular chat that you would have had if you'd have been able to meet. And I think people should arrange those types of parties with friends, and maybe friends across the world that you haven't seen for ages. And and say to them, let's do this on Friday night, let's do this on Wednesday night, let's try and make a moment where we'll have a meal together, or and people could even watch, like they could watch a movie together. Actually, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, and I suppose people could read. Yes, you could take advantage of this to read. You could listen to music. You could do some DIY, which I suppose might cause more trouble in this household if I tried to do DIY.
Learn a new skill.
Learn how
to do that, Phil.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's what YouTube is for.
Another idea we had was that for grandparents who are separated maybe from, and older people who are separated from children that are important to them, you could do story time. You could do lovely story time in the evenings and read to the children or during the day, because parents are going to be under unbelievable pressure now trying to entertain children, and so there could be time for grandparents and special aunties and uncles to do beautiful story time with children and things that you've always said you wished you could do, like let's have, because the day is long if the family are together in the house, and that there could be a moment every day where we say we'll have story time together, the whole family would have story time together, and maybe have other children linked up through Skype or whatever. People can still walk. We were at the weekend we went out cycling on the beach, and it was like, lots of people were out cycling, and obviously keeping away from people as much as you can. Yeah, that was the one we thought of. Like, I used to have an app on the phone. I have to rediscover this, but I think you can play Scrabble or chess with somebody, and you can link up. So people should download that. The other thing we would, of course, suggest is that people should listen to podcasts, and anyone maybe who didn't have time, because obviously everyone is really busy and now has time, we'd recommend the Weinstein podcast.
The Harvey Weinstein trial unfiltered, which is a verbatim reenactment of the most dramatic parts of the Weinstein trial. We were there every day in the court. We took the transcripts. We had fantastic actors in LA reenact the most dramatic scenes. So you'll hear the evidence.
We'll play a little bit of it now.
Yes, let's play a little bit of it now, and you'll hear some of that dramatic evidence.
Then it was time for us to finally hear from the one person who had stayed quiet through this whole trial, Harvey Weinstein himself. He was given the opportunity to address the court, and he took it. Let's hear from Harvey Weinstein.
Would you like to make a statement prior to sentence?
First of all, to all the women who testified, we may have different truths, but I have great remorse for all of you. I have great remorse for all the men and women going through this crisis right now in our country. The movement started basically with me, and I think what happened, I was the first example. And now there are thousands of men who are being accused, and a regeneration of things that I think none of us understood.
If you want to listen to it, just go to WeinsteinPodcast.com. Just put that into your Google, WeinsteinPodcast.com, and click on it. One thing we would say, again, a little warning there, it's a little bit R-rated, quite a lot, and obviously it's not our choice. It's exactly what was said in the court, but just to let you know about that. But I think that's a really good idea.
We're going to look at CPAC. We did FBI Lovebirds there, but let's look at the reaction to CPAC, and one particular tweeter who suggested that they send someone to CPAC with the coronavirus to wipe out the people of CPAC. We mentioned this before, but let's put a spotlight on that because it's particularly resonant at this time. We're now joined by Robert Bryce to talk about his new book, A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the book. It's published by Public Affairs, coming out, I think it's out at the minute actually.
This month, yeah.
And so Robert, an old friend of ours, we've interviewed him for our Frack Nation documentary. He's a Texas-based author, journalist, public speaker. He's been covering the energy sector for more than 30 years. His books include Smaller, Faster, Lighter, Denser and Cheaper, and my favourite, Power Hungry, which really is the history of power and history of energy. He's written every great, incredible publication on the planet. He's probably written for it, including the Wall Street Journal, National Review, New York Times. So we got him here to talk about A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. And the thesis of the book, among many of them, is that electricity is inextricably linked to development and poverty. The lack of electricity means poverty. the abundance of electricity means prosperity and development. But first of all, welcome, Robert.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So I suppose we shouldn't have you on without talking about the coronavirus. You talk about the vulnerability of the grid here somewhat, and the vulnerability of electricity supplies. Is coronavirus a complication in that, or would mass illness, is that a danger for the grid, and how vulnerable is the grid to mass illness?
Well, so far, I don't think that the virus is posing much of a threat to electricity supply. What I think, I'd flip it and say what the virus is showing yet once again is the absolute criticality, the absolute essentiality of electricity to modernity, and in particular healthcare. Remember, one of the key bits of kit that is needed to treat patients with coronavirus are ventilators. So you need absolutely 100% reliable electricity if you're on a ventilator. And the old joke is, well, if you're on a ventilator, would you rather your ventilator be powered by a coal-fired power plant or maybe a solar panel? It's not.
Exactly.
I think I might pick the coal plant.
And of course, one of the other things that this kind of reveals, or one of the thoughts that we had, was that the world has been spending vast sums of money on this push to move immediately into renewable energy from fossil fuels. And one of the numbers that you quote in the book that we found most surprising was that Germany alone has spent $222 billion on renewable energy subsidies in the last, I think, decade?
No, the last 17 years.
The last 17 years.
And that's just Germany. So you've got the UK, you've got Ireland, you've got Canada, you've got America. That's just subsidies. That's not...
that's not even all of it.
That's not all of it. That's not climate change research. That's not renewable research. It's subsidies just to produce that energy. Would that money have been better spent on tackling research on viruses?
Well, it certainly looks like a lot of it should have been directed toward that. I think that the key thing for Germany is, yes, those numbers are enormous and staggering. That a quantity of money has been spent on renewable mandates and subsidies. But Germany really does provide an object lesson in how these efforts to push for 100% renewables can be both incredibly costly to consumers and, in fact, end in tears. When you look at what's happening in Germany today, they have some of the highest electricity prices in Europe. Their electricity prices, since they started the Energiewende, this energy transition, have skyrocketed, and it's all been based on their faulty claims that they could switch their electric grid solely to renewables, and while shutting down their nuclear plants and saying they're going to shut their coal plants. Well, in fact, they haven't shuttered their coal plants. Their CO2 emissions are nowhere near their targeted reductions. And consumers are paying the price, and German industry is saying, hey, we got to slow this down. There's no way we can meet these targets. So, and then the final point on Germany, which is really a part of the book that in A Question of Power, I go into great detail, is that fundamentally the problem that Germany is facing, and it's a problem here in the U.S., is land use. That these renewables require so much land, and they require such long distance high voltage transmission projects that German rural residents across Germany are rejecting them. And in fact, the wind industry in Germany has been fought to a standstill, as has the high voltage transmission line projects.
It's extraordinary, and I think we wanted to open up this interview by talking obviously about the current crisis, which is the headlines are coming in fast and furious about what's lately happening. But I just want to kind of get back to because obviously you didn't write this book with this coronavirus in mind, and it's an incredible book, and I would really highly recommend people to get it. And just talking to Robert earlier, it's available, by the way, everyone, on Kindle. It's also available as an audio book, which could be something that people could do. I think a lot of people are going to be home now,
yes,
and people are looking for stuff to read, and they're looking for podcasts and all of of this. One thing I would highly recommend is either listening to this book on an audio or reading it on a Kindle if you don't want to go to a bookstore. It's fascinating, and I think one of the things I felt was that each chapter of this book could itself be a book in itself. And we could be on this interview forever. Let's just focus on a couple of things. One thing I want to talk about is just one of the early chapters that deals with the history of electrification. And I even remember my mother talking about rural electrification in Ireland, and what an amazing wonder it was. And for those of us who have only lived with electricity, what an extraordinary transition that was. And that particular chapter I just loved, all about how noxious and terrifying and dangerous the way they, even with this gaslighting, for example, that they had in England. Could you tell us a little bit about that history? Some of those, when you were researching the history of electricity and when electricity came, what are the standout stories that you discovered?
There was a really incredible story about in London when prior to the widespread use of natural gas, which really has only been in widespread use in the last 100 years, but preceding the use of natural gas was what was called town gas, where companies would buy coal and then heat it up, and then they would take the methane that was produced during that heating process and put it into pipes. They would also store it in tanks above ground in cities, and they were incredibly dangerous. And the accidents around these town gas tanks were very common. In fact, one of the newspapers in London reported on the problem, saying it was like living next to a bunker filled with ammunition or gunpowder. That this is, they were subject to blow up and kill lots of people, and they did. And further, that the gas itself was so noxious, and the lighting that it gave off was so noxious that that people would, they would, suffer inside because of the heat, because of the fumes, and of course, the light was really only available to the rich. That the poor and the middle class lived in the dark, and that was where they stayed.
And just one more moment on that history before we go into some other issues. The other story that I thought was, and because I'd never kind of thought about it, but I just think this is the reason why we'd recommend people to buy this book. Great book, actually, by the way. Again, actually, this just occurs to me now. People who are at home who have children at the house, you could do better. You could do you could do yourselves and those children a great favor by making them sit down and reading even that one chapter on the history part is absolutely fascinating. And the piece that I just wanted to address here was where you talk about the legislation, like in the 1300s, legislation that said, do not leave, once it got dark, don't leave your house. That there were laws preventing people from going out in the dark, basically. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, a little tiny bit about that? It's fascinating.
Sure. That some of these regulations, in fact, in big European cities, Berlin, Vienna, they were in place well into the 19th century, where people were effectively locked in their homes at night. They were not allowed to be out at night walking around on the street. And I hope we can talk about the positive effect that electricity has on women and girls. But you think about it today, where women feel safe walking at night on the street. Well, why? Because there are streetlights.
Yes.
Well, if there are no streetlights, then women and girls are subject to assault. And so this was a big breakthrough. But this for hundreds of years in Europe, that was the common practice, was that ordinary people were limited to staying in their homes after dark. And if they were out and about, they were subject to arrest.
One thing about A Question of Power, Electricity, the Wealth of Nations, is that the Audible is read by Robert Bryce, the author. So that's always a bonus when you're listening to a book. So during this quarantine times, you can hear that.
Oh, can I just mention something on that? A little naughty thing that I think Robert will enjoy as well, because I also did the Audible version of our book Gosnell. You can become a member of Audible. You can do it right now, and I think you pay. You give them your information, your credit card, all that. in a month you can get Robert's book. Then in a month you can cancel your Audible, but because they give you that book for free. But Robert gets the benefit of it.
You can have a free Audible membership
Yeah.
for a month, and then you can cancel. But in that month you can get Robert's book.
But I would also recommend that you don't get the Audible book, for example, and I would play sections of it to children if you've got children at home. It's a really important education
when you're
for them.
driving in the car.
Yeah, sorry.
So, that's the beginning of electricity. Now, are we at the end of electricity with the Green New Deal?
Well, I certainly hope not. Although the Green New Deal is, I mean, if you read what it says, and the idea that we're suddenly going to transition away from our existing energy and power systems and convert them all to renewable energy, it's just it's a fantasy land. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, I talked about Germany. What the architects of the Green New Deal, Bernie Sanders and AOC, look at Vermont today. The fundamental problem with the idea behind driving the Green New Deal is, we'll just convert everything to renewables. Okay, well, that means wind and solar, right? Geothermal, yeah, forget it. Hydro, yeah, well, no, forget that too. So you have to put up hundreds upon thousands of wind turbines and multiple square miles of solar panels. Well, today you cannot build a wind turbine in Vermont. In Bernie Sanders' home state, the last wind project that was pending in Vermont was just canceled in January because of political opposition. The backlash in rural America from Vermont to Hawaii, since I wrote the book, in Oahu in October and November, 200 people arrested protesting a wind project. That wasn't reported in the New York Times. But this is the fundamental problem with this idea that we're going to resort solely to renewables. You're not, because the land use requirements are so cartoonish that it's going to prevent that from even beginning on any kind of scale.
So let's talk about the difference that we know what the difference electricity has made in the developed world and how it's led to so much development and prosperity. What does it mean to women and children and poor people in the developing world?
Well, this is a key point, and it's one that it really is remarkable. As I say in the book, electricity frees women and girls from the pump, the stove, and the wash tub. Men benefit, of course, men and boys benefit from electricity, but it's women and girls that benefit the most. Why? Because the pump, they're not having to haul water by hand. The stove, they're not having to go out and collect wood or dung for the kitchen. From the wash tub, because they're not having to wash clothes by hand. The Swedish academic Hans Rosling estimated that there are 5 billion people in the world today who are wearing clothes that have been washed by hand. Well, that means probably that 2.5 billion women and girls are doing that washing. And when they're at the wash tub, they're not in school, they're not at the library, they're not seeking work outside the home. This is the most important energy form for women and girls, bar none. And the academic literature on it is very clear. And it just makes sense on just a kind of a basic common sense metric when you think about, well, what difference does it make? Electricity frees women and girls from the slavery, really, of common household chores.
It's amazing how that gets missed. I don't understand what's happened, to education in the world where people just don't get that. And, we're all thinking as well about 2020. There's an election year here. And the parties seem particularly divided on this issue of energy and the way forward in terms of reliable energy. I mean, we just saw at the weekend, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in debate. And I think you got to hear them as well. And Joe Biden basically saying, and we'll have a listen to that.
Let's hear what he said.
Number one, no more subsidies for fossil fuel industry. No more drilling on federal lands. No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends. Number one.
So yeah, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period, ends. Now he's kind of talking about offshore and he's talking about federal lands, but later on he talks about no new fracking. This is an anti-energy, anti-fossil fuel platform that they're running on. So what do you think of that, Robert? And what would you say to that platform?
Well, it's so deeply unfortunate. I'm not a partisan. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm just disgusted. But to see the Democrats take this position of anti-hydrocarbons and anti-fracking, where Biden said no new fracking. Well, what is it? No new fracking? Well, that means no fracking. And this is, the Democrats portray themselves as the party of the poor and the working class and the middle class. Well, if you ban hydraulic fracturing, that it will necessarily mean a dramatic increase in the price of oil, gasoline, and natural gas. The numerous studies have looked at the effects of fracking, the positive benefits to American consumers, and the estimates are in the hundreds of billions of dollars per year saved by American consumers because of hydraulic fracturing. But the Democrats, unfortunately, have been, and I say this, with no great joy, but they've just been captured by the far left environmentalists. They're anti-nuclear and they're anti-hydrocarbons, and they have pushed this misguided idea that renewables alone can power the world, and it's just simply not true.
I think it's interesting. In the last election, Hillary Clinton, said, I'm going to stop all fracking kind of on day one. It's a similar thing that Elizabeth Warren said. And, as you said, it's very bizarre how the Democrats have decided to go with this very leftist green agenda, because for places like Ohio and Pennsylvania and lots of other pockets of the country, particularly poor parts of the country, where it's the lifeblood of the whole economy, where everything has been run and paid for through this amazing miracle that happened with fracking. It's unwinnable to be against that. And that's just on the political point. But the fact that people don't seem to understand how the fracking revolution has affected the economy is kind of bizarre. Maybe, but people locally do know, right?
Well, I think so, and I think that what the combination of the coronavirus, the combination of the Russians and the Saudis deciding to flood the global market with oil, and the collapse of oil prices, excuse me, have created a situation where we're definitely heading for recession. I mean, there's just no question about it. But this is going to take a very heavy toll on the swing states, Ohio and Pennsylvania in particular, that are critical for anybody who wants to win the White House. And so, I mean, from a pure political, you take climate change out of it, you just want to look at how do you win the White House? Running against oil and gas in those key states, I think, could be the deciding factor, because there are going to be a lot of people losing their jobs. And I'm not saying oil prices are going to go up anytime soon, because I don't see that necessarily happening either. But I mean, this is critical. And I think, to jump ahead to a point that I make in the book, what is the way forward? If we're looking at a world where today, and this is one of the key facts in the book, there are 3.3 billion people roughly around the world today living in places where per capita electricity consumption is less than 1,000 kilowatt hours per capita per year. That's less electricity than what's used by an average American refrigerator. So there are hundreds of millions of people, billions of people living effectively in the dark. How do we bring them out of the dark? I think natural gas is clearly one of the key fuels that is going to be needed if we're serious about electrification and serious about reducing emissions and the issue of climate change. And yet America has become a key leader in a natural gas production. It would eliminating fracking would stop that in its tracks.
As Ann says in the book, every chapter should be another book. I mean, you've traveled to all 6 continents. You have great stories from Lebanon to India to Kansas. I mean, to Africa. It's a tour de force. It's a tour de force. It's really well written. It reads really well.
It almost reads at times like a novel. It's kind of, yeah.
And it's amazing. I think liberals love the Enlightenment, and now the forces of the endarkenment, across the world. And I don't know
the endarkenment. I haven't heard that one, but
you might have to adopt that one.
Yes, I'm taking copyright on that one. So
I think we need to talk to Robert again.
We need to have Robert back on the show. Maybe later on in the year, or later on. We'll have you back, Robert, because we really want to talk more about this. And so people.
We'll have our regular cameraman the next time.
Yes.
I hope as well. Yeah, that we'll be not struggling with the technology.
But please, if you're looking for someone to read, and don't think it's a dry academic book. It's not. It's really well written.
No.
It's all. I mean, there are hundreds of human stories told in this. No point is made without a human being's story to back it up, which is another thing. So you really get to meet people in strange places who have strange jobs and strange lives, and it's all about power and how their lives are made better or worse by power or the lack of it. So don't think it's a dry academic piece. It's not. It's about humans and humanity, and well worth the read. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks a million, y'all. If I just can add, with robertbryce.com is my website. I'm on Twitter at Power Hungry, PWR Hungry. So have a look there. I'll post the reviews and so on. So thanks again for having me on. It was really
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks,
all
Robert.
The best.
And the last thing we're going to do is, because I've neglected doing this for quite a while, obviously, because we were in New York and all of that, we're going to have a recipe. And I think maybe it's a really good time for people to, take on. We're going to have a bunch of suggestions, by the way, of things that people can do in isolation if they're isolated or if they're stuck in the house with a lot of children, and some suggestions on that. And one of them, I think, is to do cookery projects. So we made beef bourguignon, which is a bit of a project, but is really, really nice. And it's comfort food, I think, is a great idea at this time. So we're going to start, I think, by... Oh, and we say no? And then one of the other things we're going to do is we're going to make a suggestion of a movie to see. And it's interesting today. We had talked about this over the last few days and said, of course, we plan to do a review of The Hunt, which is coming to theaters, this week. And of course, as you probably know now, a lot of theaters across the country have been asked to close. And by the time you watch this, I imagine nearly all theaters will be closed. But we have also just heard from Universal that The Hunt will be available on streaming starting on Friday. So we recommend it.
Yes, but let's hold on for that towards the end, and let's kick off right now.
Those people?
Sorry, black people.
African American.
Honey, it's-
Privilege, Julius.
It's perfectly fine to call them black again.
According to who?
NPR.
So I've seen it twice now, but you saw it once. Yeah. Did it live up? I highly recommended it in my article in the Daily Wire. As a movie every conservative must see. I don't believe the propaganda that it's anti-conservative. It's not. Did you agree? Was it? I think you were initially disappointed in me, actually, when you sat initially in the theatre.
And by the way, we went to the theatre, last week before things got completely crazy. But even then, we did bring alcohol wipes and we just wiped down the chair and all that kind of thing.
And we went to the dine-in theatre, which is these big chairs.
So we were very far away from each other.
2 feet away from everyone.
But the film started, and we were with our friend Yvonne Dean Bailey as well, came with us, and she's like sitting there as well. And I think she and I were like initially not impressed at all with the film because it starts off very violent. And I would let people know it's very violent. It's not for young people. It's not for children, and it's not for anybody who can't handle the violence, although I think the violence ends up being very comical. It's that kind of cartoonish violence. But I have to say, by the end of the film, I was really glad Phelim had kind of cajoled us both into going. I just thought it was fabulous. Really, really well written. It's very interesting just looking at the reviews. The left and most mainstream reviewers really, really don't like it. They think that The Hunt don't understand satire. I think The Hunt understands satire really well. I think what's wrong with the mainstream media reviewers is that they don't like where the satire lands. And I swear, for you guys out there watching, I would there is a lot of violence in it. It's R-rated and all of that. But if you're up for some entertainment and and that kind of extreme violence doesn't bother you,
there is language,
and there is language in it. But I can tell you, I'm very sensitive to violence. And I at the beginning I was like looking at Phelim going, I don't know why I'm here. But by the end of it, I was really glad I went, and I think the guys who wrote the script are genius. And it's like there's NPR jokes, there's stuff about identity politics. It's all in there, like a climate change. It's very, very, very funny. It's spot on.
Don't believe the reviewers who tell you it takes pot shots at both sides. It doesn't really. Even the pot shots at the Conservatives there's a payoff because it's a bigger pot shot at the Liberal side. So this is not and I hate all those movies that take a pot shot at both sides. Who wants that? You want to go and see somebody, a movie is about escapism, so you want to go and take all the pot shots you want. I mean, if Hollywood took 50% pot shots at Liberals and 50% pot shots at Conservatives, I don't think anyone would mind. Conservatives would go and see themselves, no problem, being pilloried. Totally. But that's not the way it is. It's 99% one way, as we know. And this is the 1%, and the left don't like it, and that's why they really didn't. They gave it bad reviews. It's very funny. I think I looked at Rotten Tomatoes before it came on here, and it has 50% of the mainstream media, but 89% of the audience like it. And you always know, I think Adam Carolla said that's the best ratio you can have. It's because the mainstream media, 50% means they know it's good enough that they can't really condemn it, but then when it's up to the 80, when it's that 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, you know it's a really good movie that ordinary people like and that elitists really hate.
Yeah, it's become kind of a thing that we've said that before. What was the name of the lovely film that we saw with Eddie Murphy? Mr. Church, I think, that I recommended before, which was, again, very like that. Panned by the critics and the audience were delighted by it. So, I actually think it's actually worth almost looking at Rotten Tomatoes and finding low scored, finding those ratios. Once you see those ratios, it's usually something.
People love it and the mainstream movie critics don't like it or sniffy about it, it's a good movie.
So the recipe for today, and I'm going to put the recipe up on Facebook, but I think this is a great time for people to do like cookery projects. And the thing that puts people off doing things like beef bourguignon is how long it takes. It takes a really, really long time to cook. But the great thing about it is that you can use really like the really inferior cuts of meat. Actually, it's stewing beef. You want stewing beef for this, you could, and it needs a lot of time. I actually used an Instant Pot. I've had, I think I mentioned on the show before that I have an Instant Pot that's scary to me, but that's one of my big projects for this period of time, is that I am not letting that Instant Pot get the better of me. So I have used the Instant Pot, and I actually cooked it an hour and it was tremendous. But if you don't have an Instant Pot, don't worry about it. You could use a Dutch oven or any big pot at all. And yes, you need a bottle of red wine. It doesn't need to be that special, but it should be drinkable. So like a Pinot Noir or, obviously, if you're really going to go there, you could get a Burgundy. And I actually happen to have a Burgundy. Somebody sent me a nice box of wine, so I actually had that. But it's so easy to make. The big thing that I would say that I think is important is that you do brown the meat. So you brown the meat till it's nut brown. The more you brown everything before it goes into the pot, the nicer everything's going to be. And you want to caramelize that. And as you know, on this show, there's always a joke about caramelizing. It's caramelizing, not burning. But you start basically by taking the bacon. You got your bacon. You'll see all the recipe notes are up there on the Facebook page. But you're going to get the bacon, and you're going to fry that down. Fry that down ideally on a cast iron pan. Fry that down, and render the fat. And then with a slotted spoon.
What does render mean?
Render means let the fat melt away, actually. So basically, you're frying it, and you're frying it on a dry pan, by the way. And what you're going to end up with, thank you very much, you're going to end up with a lot of lovely bacon fat coming away. And so then you scoop up the bacon, and you have the fat left behind. The next thing that goes in there, the next thing that you're going to put in there, thank you very, very much. Oh, there you go. Thank you very much. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to, well, actually, very good. Thank you, Phelim. Actually, I'm glad you did that, actually, because I was going to forget this move. Then you take the meat, and Phelim did that. What did you do with the meat first, Phelim?
I browned it.
No. The first thing he did was?
I dried the meat.
Dry the meat.
Oh, and can I just say, drying the meat, you need a
high quality
kitchen roll. And I'm not...
Now, Phelim, we're in times now that people may not have kitchen roll. If you don't have kitchen roll, by the way, which could be an issue, you can use a tea towel and then just obviously it'll get full of blood and everything, but just throw it in the washing machine. Right?
And then and then season it with salt and pepper. But if you're having kitchen roll, just be careful that the kitchen roll... Okay, people may not have it, but I was in a house recently with the kitchen roll that was not of high quality.
Inferior kitchen roll. But the whole thing is that we went to a house and we cooked for people. It's a thing we do for our friends, Ali and Guy. Shout out to those two. And we go to their house, and pretty much invariably I get extremely frustrated because they don't really cook. That's why we cook for them. And so they have inferior... things like inferior kitchen roll, and then there'll be problems with they won't have oil, they've missing ingredients.
To be fair, generally when we tell them to get something, they get something of a good quality, but there are missing items.
Okay, we're not going to abuse them anymore. So basically, get that. Here's there's Mr. Scaredy Cat coming to say hi. So basically, then you're going to throw that meat in. You're going to put that meat in, and I would, if you're going to make this, I'd make quite a lot, and I think I've got the quantities there somewhere in the recipe thing. It's a couple of pound of meat. So brown that in batches.
Where's this recipe going to?
It's going to be on the Facebook page, the Ann Phelim Scoop Facebook page. Brown that till it's nice and nut brown. Again, take that away off with a slotted spoon and remove it to the same place that you have the bacon, a nice big bowl or a nice big plate. Next, you're going to put in your shallots and use shallots, like 14, 15, 16 shallots. By the way, again, for anyone who has problems with their pantry right now, onion is just fine. And brown that. Take that off, put that into the bowl. Then you put in your carrots, loads of carrots, roughly cut. Actually, keep them nice and big because they're going to cook for a really long time. And as I said, the whole thing is all of this is going to go up, and then mushrooms.
Fry the onions.
You fry the onion, fry everything. Then you put the mushrooms in. You might at that point have your pan might be drying a little bit, so you can throw in some butter in there if the pan gets dry. Cat. Then look at the cat. No, cat, stop that. And then add the garlic and cook for another minute. And then again, if you have it, ideally you should put in like a cup of cognac or a half cup of cognac, and then throw that in and burn it. Put a match to it, stand well back, and let that burn off the alcohol. Then you get your big pot, your Dutch oven or your big pot, throw everything in there, and then throw in your big bottle of wine, tomato paste, beef broth, thyme with a H, THYME. You throw that all in there, and if you're doing it, if you're doing it in the Instant Pot, it's going to take an hour. If you're doing it on a Dutch oven, 2 or 3 hours. And just every now and again check on it, make sure you have fluid still there, and you're going to cook it until the beef becomes really tender. And then just serve. Super easy. We served it with mashed potatoes. Yum, 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 yum. Mashed potatoes and a lot of butter, I have to say now. And it was yummy, yummy, yummy. And we're still eating it, right, Phelim?
Yeah, still there. We had it for lunch today.
We were very smart now. We went to our friends and cooked for them, but we didn't leave them the leftovers now. We took the leftovers home.
We've been stung like that before.
Yeah, we made that mistake before.
Not with them, but with other. Yes, we're not talking about that though. But
no.
Yeah.
So again, one thing I'm going to try and do is it mightn't be for next week because we're all just catching up with ourselves here, but I do want to try and apparently you can make yogurt really easy in the Instant Pot using full fat milk. So
well, that's the end of this week's podcast.
Yeah, this is the end of this week's podcast. Apologies for the fact that it all looks a little bit pasted together, but the truth is it's important that we do this rather than it be perfect, and we just didn't want Magda to come over here or Yvonne to come over here. We just wanted to kind of see how we can work out on our own in isolation, and we'd love to hear from you. If you've any suggestions for nice things that children can do. People could sing, by the way, listen to music.
Yeah, make the comments on the YouTube channel. We read them all and we try and reply to them all, so we really look forward to those comments. And don't forget to put comments or ratings on our Apple podcast as well. We really like good 5-star rating there, please, or comment. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. God bless and stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you.